and Facebook channels.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, MPs have approved Plan B coronavirus measures in England, despite a bigger-than-expected Tory rebellion. Almost 100 backbenchers opposed the government over the introduction of COVID passes for nightclubs and big events. Founder and executive chairman of Oakman Inn's Peter Borg-Neil told LBC many businesses have already been hit, though.
In so much as at a vital time of the year, we're seeing a lot of cancellations. All the Christmas parties are pretty much gone. I'm kind of trading okay because I'm out in the suburbs of the country. Industry colleagues who are in the city are having a terrible, terrible time. And at the moment, there's no financial help. But if they're going to do it, they need to support the industries that are going to be badly damaged.
The rule on extending the use of face masks has also been passed with a majority of 400. People across Scotland are being asked to restrict gatherings to just 3 households. It's to prevent Omicron overwhelming the NHS. All 11 countries will be removed from the red travel list as of 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's understood the measures are now less effective in slowing the spread of the variant. And QPR's championship match at home to Swansea is being called off following a COVID outbreak at the club. It's their second successive postponement. LBC markets report the FTSE 100's closed down 12 points at 72.18. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.17. LBC weather, that rain will move across Scotland. Largely dark elsewhere though and dry. A low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 1 minute past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale here with you until 10. It's Cross Question. The panel tonight is made up of Duncan Baker, the Conservative MP for North Norfolk, Andy McDonald, good friend of the programme, Labour MP for Middlesbrough, former shadow employment spokesman, Richard Sefton, host of the State of Mind podcast and a mental health counsellor, and Claire Pearsall, who's a former Conservative special advisor. No surprises on what most of the questions are so far, but if you'd like to ask a question to our panel over the course of the next hour, the number to call 0345 6060 973. And I always remind you, don't forget you can watch us also on Global Player, on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk and the LBC YouTube and Facebook channels.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And I've just had a text from Denise Headley saying, I'm listening. Are you okay? Your voice is different. This is my post-cold sexy voice. Well, I like to think of it like that, but Andy, clearly you don't agree. Right, let's go to the first call. It's Adam in Westminster. Hello, Adam.
Hi, good evening, Iain, and good evening to the panel. I'd like to ask Iain, quite honestly, if, and it's a big if, obviously, at the moment, the Omicron variant over the next course of the few weeks and, let's say, to the end of January, proves to be, beyond all reasonable doubt, much milder and less dangerous than any of the variants that we've currently been exposed to, does the panel think that all of the restrictions should and would be removed by the end of January?
I think there's a sunset clause, isn't there, for January the 26th? Andy McDonald.
Yeah, well, there is, but not so far as the mandatory vaccination and the changes to people's terms of employment. That's going to remain, regardless of how the Omicron variant works through, and that's the one that concerns me, and that's why I voted against it tonight. I thought that was...
So you defied your whip?
Oh, I certainly did, because it's abundantly clear that all of the unions, all of the Royal Colleges, the BMA, and many professionals in the health service thought that was unnecessary. My own trust has got 97% compliance, and of the 3% are new entrants to the service, and they're on their journey to be vaccinated. So I think that's a disproportionate response. And of course, what worries me more than anything is the government's own assessment as to the likely numbers of people who are going to leave the National Health Service as a result of this change. We can ill afford to lose anybody, but if it's anywhere between 65,000 and 110,000 workers in the NHS, how are we going to get through all the things we have to do, and of course get back to core services? So I voted against it. We didn't have that framework agreement in front of us to say how it was going to be rolled out and what the impact is going to be in terms of people's terms and conditions and pensions and so on.
And were there many other Labour MPs that took your view?
There were. I've got the numbers here, but we had 100 votes against. So it was strange how each of the full votes worked through. It seems some of the Libertarian wing of the Conservative Party were keen to express their anger around issues like face masks and the like, but when it came to employment rights, it wasn't really that much of an issue. So it seemed to swing, but I haven't really studied the numbers in any detail as yet.
Do you think a mistake has been made by Keir Starmer on this in providing the support that the government needed to get the votes through, or do you think that he could have done something rather different? Say, look, I want to support you, but in return, I want you to change statutory sick pay. So for people who are isolated and have to stay at home and can't work, they would get more sick pay. He could have done that, couldn't he?
Well, that's politics. And I think that was something that I intervened on in the course of the debates today to make that very point, that, you know, that there are so many millions of workers in our country who don't even qualify for statutory sick pay because they don't earn enough. Can you believe that that's how it works through? And those that do simply can't survive on £96 a week. So what's the choice you're going to make faced with this horrible dilemma around this virus, and you're obliged to isolate? What do you do if you're faced with that alternative of no money on £96 a week? I would have wanted to see us restore that to a proper level, something akin to a living wage, so people could safely isolate. And I think we should continue to press for that. And I know that many people on my side, in fact all of Labour MPs, will be wanting to see that change.
Duncan Baker, you were elected in 2019. You supported the government tonight. A lot of your colleagues didn't. I see that the guy who won the by-election, Noel Bexley and Sidcup, one of his first acts was to rebel against his own government, which I thought was, shall we say, in Sir Humphrey terms, a rather brave and courageous move. Why didn't you join the 100 or so of your colleagues who rebelled?
Well, there's a very easy answer to that question. I mean, you know my seat particularly well, having fought it a number of years ago, and I represent the oldest demographic of cohort in the country. Quite frankly, with the statistics that we are being shown at the moment, I wasn't prepared to vote in a way that put those people at risk. And I've explained that on my social media. It's amazing, actually, from your inbox to then when you make a public statement, how there is a complete mismatch of opinion, and it's largely been pretty positive. I want to avoid a lockdown at all costs, and I think most people would recognise that. And when you're dealing with something that you don't simply know enough about at the moment, and also when you look at the statistics, I mean, we have 60% of the country that haven't had that all-important third booster jab, 50% in my constituency. I'm not prepared to put them at risk, and I'm prepared to say that, and that's the way I voted this evening.
Mark Harper, the former Conservative Chief Whip, you probably saw him on the way into the studio. He was here 10, 15 minutes ago. He said it was important to send a message to Boris Johnson. That's what the 80, 90, 100 Tory rebels were doing. What message were you sending to Boris Johnson?
Well, I was sending one of support, and one of support which actually said, I recognise the risks that are here. Now, if those people who have voted against their government this evening find that in 10 days' time, let's say, because we always know there's a lag in the data, and frankly, and I think you can start to feel the data anyway, you can start to see that in London already the dominant strain has now started to overtake. I think it's 44% yesterday, and they're envisaging it to be the dominant strain by the end of the week. And if you start to see some of those numbers take hold, now even if you take them at a very prudent estimate, and they're not the sort of 200,000 a week, but you can already see today they're up to 60,000. There is a noticeable material jump that is happening day after day.
But is it infections that's important, or is it hospitalisations? Because the evidence from South Africa that we're seeing today is that this is a much milder form. The hospitalisations haven't occurred in the numbers that they were expecting. Obviously, the government has taken a precautionary principle here, which is quite understandable. But in 10 days' time, if it hasn't developed in this way, aren't you all going to think, well, what was all this about?
Yeah, so that's the point, isn't it? That actually it's hospitalisations and deaths that are the key numbers. Okay, and the general consensus with most people agree is that the numbers of infections tends to lead to hospitalisations, and that's the whole precipice of what we're dealing with here, is that we're at a crucial point in the year where the NHS is always beginning to suffer. Now, if you were to add those numbers of hospitalisations, people that get very, very sick, okay, they might not pass away. But if you put that layer of pressure onto the NHS at this time of year, it would be irresponsible not to take it seriously until we know exactly what we're dealing with this variant. And that is why the government has done what it's done. And actually, I think it's the right call. I think you've seen the mood in the country change. What you saw at the very beginning of the weekend was almost sort of shock. You know, this is what's happening. Wow, we didn't expect this to happen. I think even the Prime Minister would say that he was shocked by what he was being shown by the scientists in our 1922 committee meeting this evening. Many of us, even myself, has gone through that sort of washing machine of what am I doing right here? And then as you come into the days that we've got ahead of us and the vote we just now had, I think there's a lot more consensus that we're making the right decision.
Well, we've heard from the two MPs. I'm going to ask both of you, Richard and Claire, if you had been MPs today, what would you have done? Richard, you've been very critical. I've seen your social media. You've been very critical of Boris Johnson generally, but I suspect that you might have forced yourself to vote with him today.
For once, I think he's been quite proactive instead of reactive. For once, he's not capped in hindsight. He likes to throw that to the other side, but I think all the way through this, Mr. Johnson's been capped in hindsight. I think, like you say, we look to South Africa, but don't they have a younger population and less vaccination? So there's a kind of two points there. So we can look over there and see that it's just, and the reports that we're getting, that it's a mild flu, but that's for their younger population. What's it going to be here? I think, yeah, I would have voted with the government if I was an MP. And
I can see your teeth gritted when you say that.
I think it's wrong to, like you say, some have said that they were sending a message to Boris Johnson. This is the wrong time to send a message to Boris Johnson, I think, because it's people's health.
Absolutely.
It's the complete wrong. That's playing politics. And I always laugh at that, because when they say it in the House, I'm thinking, hang on, you're politicians. Aren't you supposed to be playing politics? I always question that. Yeah, no, I would be minded to vote with them. And if it turns out to be less serious, then we've taken a precaution. In Wales, we've kept our masks on all the time. I've travelled down from North Wales today. We've kept our masks on all the time in the shops. We are, I think, supposed to show COVID passports and stuff going in and out of pubs. I'm also in a band, so I'm in pubs every weekend and see people walking in wearing masks.
Give us a song at the end.
Them off. Yeah, well, I fully intend to.
But Mark Harper would argue, well, that's all very well, Richard. You live in Wales where you've had a lot of these measures already. Have they really made much effect? I mean, the COVID passports, the mask wearing, are infection rates in Wales noticeably lower than England? I don't think they are they?
I don't know. It sounds wrong. It makes me feel safer. I've got an autoimmune disease. And also Wales has been well ahead on the boosters. I had my booster jab 2 months ago, really? And I'm just 40. Yeah. Where are we now? December, maybe early last month. But and my partner, who's 26, has been given his date for his on the 6th of January. So,
and he's looking at his now.
Yeah. I'm a lot older than you. I got it on the 5th of November, my booster.
Well, I was 26th of October. So.
Oh, well, you've always been ahead of that.
I had mine today.
So
did you?
Yeah, I've still got the same.
It's a miracle that you're both here then. Claire, what do you make of what happened today, and how would you have voted?
I would have been one of the rebels. I don't see the need to start adding paperwork to businesses. If you look at it from a business point of view, you can see at the moment that parties are being cancelled for varying different reasons. People are not going to the theatre as much or to the cinema because they're concerned. But on the flip side of it, if the government say that you can have a negative lateral flow test and use that result to gain entry, then why would you also need to put COVID passports into existence? Now, you're looking at large venues, so does that include sports stadiums, nightclubs? It encompasses quite a large arena. And I just worry that we then extend that out into restaurants, into pubs and things like that. So I support mask wearing. I don't have a problem, and I agree with Andy over vaccinations. But I would have voted against the government on this one.
Duncan, what do you think the next few weeks hold for Boris Johnson? I don't know if we're going to get a question on the by-election on Thursday, but say that goes wrong. So Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, the secretary of the 1922 committee, he's already warning Boris Johnson that letters will be going in, that he will face a leadership crisis. It's as clear as night follows day that is a possible result of a by-election loss on Thursday, isn't it?
Do you know, I've spent, 2 years to this last weekend as an MP, and I can honestly tell you, Ian, I can't predict what's going to happen from one week to the next.
Oh, go on, have a go.
So,
just for laughs.
I don't think you can never quite predict it. Look, I seem to remember sitting here this time last year thinking that things were pretty difficult with the government at that moment in time. Then we discovered a vaccine. I think it was the Pfizer one, first of all. We ended up embarking on what is quite arguably one of the best vaccination rollouts in the entire world. We then rolled from what was arguably a pretty difficult autumn into when spring came around, winning countless numbers of seats in local elections. The entire government fortunes were changed and everything was looking pretty good. You can see things change on a sixpence. Yes, I agree that losing North Shropshire on Thursday with a 23,000 majority would be absolutely terrible. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But Boris Johnson has an incredible knack of getting out of very difficult situations. What he did on Sunday night to come along and say we are going to get everybody booked in for their booster jab by the end of December, we know that our NHS is phenomenal. They rise to challenges time and time again. Now, take in Norfolk alone, they have to treble the amount of jabs that they...
But they don't seem to think this is possible.
Well, yes, they might not think
so if that doesn't happen, say at the end of December, you've lost a by-election, at the end of December, you've maybe got 3/4 of the people with a booster jab rather than 100%. Now, you could argue that's still a success, but that will be a failure by the terms that the Prime Minister himself set down.
Yeah, you'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But what I'm saying to you is that we end up in a situation where I think this almost history repeating itself. We saw where we were this time last year. Things changed incredibly quickly. I've got a huge amount of confidence that we are going to see our NHS, all of our doctors and nurses, rise to the challenge, get people jabbed. And I think that is what people are going to focus on at the moment. I genuinely think that that is the way that we will turn this around. And I actually think that trying to have any talk about removing a Prime Minister as the country faces a crisis is something that the general population would absolutely not want to see.
We're slightly anticipating the next question, which we'll come to in just a couple of minutes' time. 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
When you're
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
90 minutes past 8 on LBC. Let's go to our next question. It's from Bill in Exmouth. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Bill. Sorry, hello, Iain. Can I wish you and your panel a jolly Merry Christmas and all the best for the forthcoming year.
Thank you.
Is this the end for Boris or Johnson, do you think?
The end or the beginning of the end, to quote Churchill?
Or perhaps the beginning of the end, maybe. Yeah, okay. maybe the beginning of the end.
I suppose as soon as a politician is elected to be party leader, it's kind of the beginning of the end, isn't it? It's all downhill from there. I'm going to ask everybody to sort of put their political allegiances to one side here. I know that's probably not going to be possible, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. And just take on the role of political pundit here and try and look at it a little bit dispassionately, which is easier said than done, particularly for Richard Sefton.
The glasses have come off. So have the gloves. Looking at it non-partisan. I actually think it could be. I was thinking that last week. The week before last, I would have said no. Nothing seems to move. Nothing seems to take hold. I do think the Christmas parties have made a difference. He started off saying that there were no Christmas parties. However, there were no rules broken at the Christmas parties that didn't exist. Then there is footage of him hosting a Zoom quiz, which kind of puts him at one and kind of raises the doubt of whether he was at or knew about the others. I think his credibility should have always been very low. We all knew he's been sacked from jobs for lying. We all know who Boris Johnson is, and we all know what we get when we vote for Boris Johnson. But we knew that
when he was elected.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So he's kind of like Teflon. So is it the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson? Would I like it to be the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson? Yes. Do I think it will be? Probably no.
Okay, Claire?
Well, I think there's a chipping away at trust. When you look at the past sort of 18 months that we've had, there have been so many incidents where colleagues have been marched up the hill to have a U-turn, to march back down again, and the messaging to change. So I think the lack of consistency, the lack of honesty, and as I say, that chipping away of trust, tonight's vote, I think, does represent a coming together of these things. So we are looking now at what's going to happen between now and Christmas, and certainly Christmas and New Year, because I think that's going to be vitally important. Do I think it's the beginning of the end? I think quite possibly. We see it with leaders once they've been in power, and as you say, it doesn't have to be for very long. Right from the start, it's going to look worse. So I do think it's the beginning of the end. I think there is just this steady drip, and it has been an ongoing news schedule for the last 18 months. So yeah, I do.
Okay, Duncan Baker.
No, I don't. The reason I don't...
Shock horror.
Yeah, what a shocking statement. But I don't. And I think because the country really wants to get through the crisis that is sitting in front of them, potentially over the next few weeks. I think that is where the focus is. Nobody wants to see another lockdown. The Prime Minister has gone early, and he's gone hard at trying to tackle what we don't quite know is coming down the tracks at the moment. And if he gets through this next phase of time, and as we've talked about just now, the booster rollout goes extremely well, I think actually this will be another defining moment. We saw it last year, and I think we'll see it again this year.
Because I should explain that you are sounding very much like a Tory loyalist. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But you have been outspoken in the past. When Matt Hancock resigned, I think you, or before he resigned, you were the first Tory backbencher to call for him to go, which, I mean, must have been an uncomfortable experience for a new MP to do that. And I think you probably got a bit of flack from some of your colleagues for speaking out like that. So I just wanted to sort of tell our listeners that even though you're coming across as a complete loyalist tonight, you have had your say in the past on these issues.
Yeah, I have. I mean, first of all, I don't take too much apology for being a Conservative MP and sticking to a Conservative line and manifesto. I mean, I was elected by the good burghers of Norfolk by a rather large majority at my first time out, so I don't make an apology for that. I mean, I am a Conservative MP. Yeah. Didn't mean to do that. But when it comes down to questions around trust and good judgment, they come away from the political sphere. I actually do think that in terms of how the economy is being run, how the pandemic is being handled, and certainly a lot of the legislative programme actually is pretty solid.
Okay. Right. Andy McDonald.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Duncan's hit on quite an interesting point, that the trust was there, and all the trust or support was there from the country to see the government lead us through this pandemic. And you're right, it was also baked in, the dishonesty, the racism, the homophobic remarks and all the rest of it, which in my lifetime, that's usually been enough for 10 prime ministers to walk the plank. But this man's got away with it. But Duncan's right, because it's hit on this, it's not just the Peppa Pig and all that sort of business, but the Allegra Stratton moment, I think, just absolutely incensed people, because it was 12 months ago when they were going through all of that, not seeing their loved ones, not even being able to attend funerals, and to learn that the Prime Minister was overseeing this cavalier attitude, imposing rules upon the country and not obeying them themselves.
So you think in retrospect that might be seen as a turning point?
I think so, and I, in the House of Commons, you see the reaction of Conservative MPs, and some of they're absolutely incandescent. Some people have been incredibly loyal, and the conversations are happening. And of course, when that translates into poll deficits, that really matters. They'll stick with Johnson so long as he's a winner. But the moment he's a liability, they'll take the legs from underneath him. They are the most ruthless organisation.
That's something your party needs to learn from.
Do you know what? We do need to be more ruthless about how we go about our business.
And you're the man to do it.
The Tories are they're superb at it. When they make their minds up, that is it, and he's out the door. I think a lot of them have made that decision, and I sense that his days are numbered. It's not just, I'm not saying it because I want it to be true, because I do want it to be true, because I think he's the worst Prime Minister I've ever known in my life. But I'm sensing it from the Conservative benches that they've reached tipping point with him, and enough is enough.
Right. A follow-up text on this from Kevin in Sheffield, who says, some of your panellists may not like Boris Johnson, but is Keir Starmer really the man to save us? Andy McDonald again.
Well, Keir said of Jeremy, a Labour Prime Minister is always better than a Tory Prime Minister. A Labour government's better than a Tory government. I agree with Keir Starmer wholeheartedly in that.
It's not the most ringing endorsement I've ever heard.
I think I think Keir is a pretty serious fella for serious times, and I would much rather Keir Starmer be at the helm at the moment. I may have my disagreements with him. We didn't agree on everything in Shadow Cabinet, but I'd infinitely prefer him to be leading our country right now. I would trust him to make the big decisions and get them right.
Absolutely.
Richard?
I just think, to anyone saying that, is there any evidence of the lies that Keir Starmer's told, the millions that Keir Starmer's given to his friends, the cronyism, the corruption, the videos from last year when he broke rules? Is there any evidence of that? If there's not, then Keir Starmer's a better man than Boris Johnson. And I know that's not a ringing endorsement. I'm saying that for the people that say that. I actually trust him.
Do you not think there has to be a bit more enthusiasm for an opposition leader to become Prime Minister? You can't just rely on being seen as a bit better than the other guy. There's got to be a bit of pizzazz there. There's got to be a bit of inspiration.
Well, like Andy says, a serious man at serious times. We need, I think, we need someone that's serious. And instead we've got someone that's joking. We've got someone talking about Peppa Pig, losing his place in speeches, playing dress up, going out as a policeman, dressing up, being at a vaccination centre, I think yesterday or today, and if I turned up and saw him at the vaccination centre, I'd possibly walk straight out again. I don't think we need that at this time. I think Keir Starmer would be infinitely better.
Okay. I'm guessing that you two are not going to agree with that, Claire?
No. He is very serious. He is very good at standing up and standing at the dispatch box and being analytical, but there's nothing else to it. And you do need a certain amount of personality to take on the job of Prime Minister. So as good as Keir Starmer may be at, cross-examination of people, and he is good at details, whereas Boris Johnson may not be as good at detail, there's nothing else to back him up. And I don't think that just being better than the other person
What about the
really
people in his
it.
new team? I mean, you look at Wes Streeting, the new Shadow Health Secretary, who I think even his worst enemy would have to admit that he's hit the ground running and made probably far more. And I mean, I thought Jonathan Ashworth wasn't bad, but I think Wes Streeting has made a real impact over the last 2 weeks.
He has, and I think the reshuffle that's happened is actually very good. So I think our side actually needs to be a little bit worried about that. And of course, this is the reshuffle that should have happened earlier in the year, which didn't quite go ahead for varying problems in the Labour Party. But it is. There is some inspired choices there. I do think Wes is actually very good, and to listen to him in the chamber, it really changed my opinion of him.
Duncan.
There's a great problem with the Labour Party at the moment, and the MPs that were elected under Corbyn, clearly there is still a huge disparity between the Keir Starmer trying to move his party into the sort of moderate centre ground and then having a whole tranche of Corbynistas and hard left socialists at the other end of it. And he isn't going to be able to marry up those two and keep them together. The great difference in the Conservative Party is, yes, there may be some difference of opinions going on with how we vote on restrictions and the like, but actually the unit is pretty much still intact. I don't think you've got that.
Really?
Yes, I think we'll come to that in a moment, but that you haven't got within the Labour Party. Now, if you had an election tomorrow, which we're not going to have, but when you do come to that election, the great difference between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer is one of them has got the X factor, one of them's got some charisma, and one of them makes people go out and vote. Whether we like that or not, that is true, and it isn't Keir Starmer. And what you will end up having, don't forget, Boris Johnson won an 80-seat majority in the not too distant past. You will end up with a Labour Party which won't win a majority, and if it got anywhere close to it, it would be propped up by the SNP. The British public know that, and they would be absolutely horrified by that prospect.
So, rerun of the 2015 election, I guess that's what we've got to look forward to. Thank you all very much for those answers. We'll have some more in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Serena Farrow.
The Prime Minister has suffered his largest rebellion during a vote on Plan B measures in England. The restrictions passed thanks to Labour's backing, but 96 Conservative MPs voted against COVID passes. People in Scotland are being asked to limit socialising to 3 households before and after Christmas. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says the advice wouldn't apply to Christmas Eve, Christmas Day or Boxing Day. And all 11 countries will be removed from the red travel list from tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's understood the measures are now less effective in slowing the spread of the Omicron variant. LBC, where the rain across western Scotland, particularly tonight, largely dry elsewhere with a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC. leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. Let me reintroduce my panel. By the way, apologies for my voice tonight. I sound a lot worse than I feel, so that's the main thing, I suppose. Duncan Baker is here, the Conservative MP for North Norfolk. Andy McDonald, Labour MP for Middlesbrough. Richard Sefton, host of the State of Mind podcast on mental health issues. And Claire Pearsall, who's a former Conservative Special Advisor. Chris is in Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hi.
Well, my question is this. Should unqualified acceptance of free speech be a condition for all would-be university entrants?
Wow. That's quite a deep question. It can be interpreted, I suppose, in a number of ways. Duncan Baker.
Yeah, it can be interpreted in a number of ways. So where do we start with it? Look, I think some of the problems that we are finding in life is that we should be allowed to have free speech, and people should be able to go to university and to school to be able to speak freely in the way that they want, and our teaching profession allow that to happen without necessarily moving in a direction that imposes their own free ways onto people. And I think sometimes we have seen that over the last couple of years, certainly with cancel culture and the like, become somewhat a problem. And that, I remember speaking in one of the debates about this last year, and that becomes a huge problem. People want to be able to have free speech. We have to respect that. And we seem to have lost some of that in society at the moment. There seems to be this binary fashion where you're all right or you're all wrong. I remember we talked about this last time we met together with what happens on social media. We've lost that real art of respecting one another. I even wrote this evening out to the 100 or so people that emailed me about why I voted the way I did. Let's have a respectful response back, or respectful debate about how someone votes without resorting to some of this behaviour that we see.
But free speech covers a multitude of sins, doesn't it? Because I think we all agree that we want free speech, but where does it end? For example, there are already restrictions on free speech. There are things that I can't say on this programme because if I did, I would be taken off air. If I used particular swear words, if I said things that were so extreme and unpalatable, Ofcom would come down on me and LBC like a ton of bricks. So I don't have complete free speech on this programme. Should people who want to go on university campuses and make speeches that could be construed as anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, should they be allowed to? And where do you impose the limit?
Yeah, I think you do. Okay, so where do you impose that limit? I think we still have people in this country that do know how to behave in a respectful way. They do actually understand the boundaries that people should exist by. And being anti-Semitic, being racist, speaking in those ways, there is a clear definition, I think, that most reasonable people would understand. And we have to abide by that and make sure we operate in that way, Ian.
But, Claire, we remember that Amber Rudd was effectively chased off Oxford University because she was a Conservative, that people felt unsafe in her presence. Now, that's the sort of thing I think Chris is referring to here, where somebody who I think most normal people, Labour MPs would agree that Amber Rudd is not an extreme Conservative, and yet the speaking invitation was withdrawn from her as she arrived to make her speech.
I so disagree with this cancel culture because educational establishments are there to present all different points of view, and then it is up to individuals to pull that to pieces and learn from it and move on and find out what it is they think. Certainly what I thought at 18, 19, 20 years old will differ from me now when my age begins with a 4. It happens to everybody.
No.
Thank you. Late, but thank you. I just disagree that you can lose somebody from a programme, from a lecture, because you simply disagree with a belief that they have. How can that be right? Surely you can then go on to question them and say, well, why do you think this? How do you do this? And you learn from it. So, things like that. Amber Rudd is a brilliant speaker. She's a very smart lady, and to lose that is really, really sad.
Well, Richard Sefton, you look at the example of David Starkey, who was effectively cancelled by universities, cancelled by the media after his interview with Darren Grimes. Now, he was on this programme a couple of months ago. In fact, he's on tomorrow night as well. Now, there were many people who said, no, he should just be cancelled from all public life forever, despite having issued an apology. Where do you draw the line?
See, I agree with Claire that there's a difference for me. I think that debate and learning from each other and that's what you go to university for, surely, to learn the way of the world, to see that there's difference out there, but to question difference and then get the answers. And the way that the thing that sticks in my throat is that free speech these days seems to mean, can I insult you? And there seems to be a culture of, what can I say to insult you the most? And what I don't understand, not only as a counsellor, but as a person, is why would you want to say something that will hurt someone else? Where's that come from?
Are you not really talking about social media there, where there's a degree of anonymity? You're not speaking to the person face to face, and that in itself, it enables people to say things that they wouldn't normally do.
Not necessarily. I suppose there's a degree to that, but also growing up as a gay guy, having trans friends, we see it in our faces. You know, having a black stepfather that's Muslim. I've seen it in our faces. We've seen the overt racism, the homophobia, the transphobia. We felt it, and it seems to be put down as free speech, and it should be allowed. Why should it be? Why should it? That's when it crosses the line for me. I'm all for asking questions. I'm all for teaching. I'm all for telling people what I've experienced. My experience is. What I'm not for is people blatantly insulting me.
Okay. Andy?
Well, it is difficult, but I think you're right, Iain. There are things that we all accept they should not say, and we really don't want to hear from them or engage with them. If somebody's going to come onto a programme and say that the Holocaust didn't ever happen, just is a myth, I think we'd be pretty upset about that, and rightly so. And the offence that would cause would be absolutely massive. Social media's got, there's an awful lot of things that Duncan and I, we receive from anonymous people are just grossly offensive, and we seem to have lost that ability to be respectful to each other and careless of the harm and the hurt that we cause. But I was reading, Pope Francis has written a book, Letters to Dream, and he spends a lot of time exploring these issues and about the ability to just discern and be able to listen to one another. And I think there's an awful lot in what he has to say, and I think we could learn from that. But sadly, it is the currency of politics that we take up viscerally opposed positions, and we don't negotiate, we don't listen, and we end up back exactly in the same position. I think our body politic has got a lot to learn from this. I think there's a better way to do business than we currently do it.
Well, let's go to an early break because I want to give you plenty of time to answer the next question. It's 8:43.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
One thing that really has emerged is the record number of vacancies, up to 1.2 million. If you haven't got a job, why not? There are 1.2 million jobs out there. For some people who are wandering around rattling a paper cup, why don't they go and get a job? I have one person spend 5 minutes. I have got pages of jobs here from all sorts of areas. So why aren't people getting them?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:46 on LBC. With me in the studio, Conservative MP Duncan Baker, Labour MP Andy McDonald, the host of the State of Mind podcast, Richard Sefton. You've got a new episode out this week with the former Labour MP, Sir David Hanson. And he basically puts them on the couch. I don't know if you wish to go on Richard's couch, Andy, but you get some good answers, I'll tell you. And Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Special Advisor. Right, let's go to a text question from Sandra in Birmingham. She says, first it was Arthur Labinjo Hughes, now we have Star Hobson, not even 2 years old and murdered by her mum's girlfriend. What's wrong with our social services? Claire, can I come to you first on this?
This is an horrendous case. I read about it today, and coming off the back of what happened to little Arthur, it's just so appalling. And when you look into the detail of poor little Star Hobson, the family, again, the extended family, had reported their concerns into social services. But because the mother's girlfriend, I believe, was from a travelling community, it was treated as a racist slur, and that was dismissed. I just think that, again, we go back to this offence, and we were talking about it with free speech. Why would it be wrong, even if it is a member of the travelling community, they are still capable, as the next person,
we've had these excuses before, haven't we? With the grooming gangs in all sorts of northern towns. People saying, the police apparently saying, no, we can't investigate those too much because we'll be accused of being racist. And this is the result.
It is the result. And when the social services team were showing pictures of a little girl with a bruised face and a bruised neck and being obviously drowsy when being looked at by social services workers, why did they not take action? Why did they just say, oh, that's okay? How can that possibly be okay for a small child to have substantial bruising to face and neck with no explanation particularly given, or no believable explanation given? Now, I know that children have accidents and run into things. My own child did exactly that, and he cut across his eyebrow when he flew across a playground. And I was absolutely mortified and took him to A&E, and he had to be glued up. And they questioned me at the time, as to how it had happened and why it had happened and all the rest of it. But this was substantial, unexplained injuries on a very small child. I just can't understand now why social services are not looking into it. Is there not enough training? Is there not enough funding? Are we scared to look at families in depth in case we are accused of being bigoted, racist, or incorrect?
Duncan, let's pick up on the funding issue there, because after the tragedy of what happened to poor little Arthur, I heard various people say, well, this is the result of funding cuts. And it's undeniable that many social services departments are operating at a great stretch. Is that part of the explanation? Is it the whole explanation? Or what do you think is going on here? Because these two cases following one very close to the other, people are going to think, well, this may be happening more often than we would ever have had in our deepest nightmares.
Yeah, it's certainly not all. This is a failure of people. It is not necessarily a failure of a system. I think we need to remember that. As Claire has just said, this is social services in, I believe, around Bradford area, where I think the MP for Keighley has already called today for the leader of the council to resign. And it is a failure of the people that are running that organisation to have a total failure, dereliction of duty to spot what has happened in that poor little girl's case. I read it today, and I have to say, Iain, I actually struggled to get through the story. I have little girls myself, and it is the most disgraceful story. It is a mixture of issues. As I say, it is the people who failed in their duty. They are qualified professional individuals who are paid to ensure that instances like that never happened, and they failed to do that. Yes, we can all say that funding into social services across the years has been a difficult thing across a long time now. It goes back many years. I'd like to think, and I've always said, actually, coming through the route of being a local councillor, that devolving power and spending to local government is a good thing. I believe in devolution and having those spending powers there. But it is a mixture. But at its heart, it is not the failure of the system, I believe, in this case. It is the failure in the individuals who didn't do their role correctly.
Andy McDonald, let me play devil's advocate here and put it to you that over the past 10 or 15 years, we've had Victoria Columbier, Peter Connolly, Arthur, and now Star Hobson. 4 incidents which I'm sure have things in common, but very young children that have been failed by either the system or individuals. Isn't it always going to be inevitable that there will be the odd case that kind of slips through the net? That's not to excuse anything, but if we're trying to look for common themes here, can we really say that it's the system that is at fault? And any inquiry, and obviously there have to be inquiries in these things, quite right too, it's going to be quite difficult for recommendations to come about that will affect every social services department in the country, because most of them are doing a good job.
Well, they are under difficult circumstances. This is yet another grotesque case. But I think if we satisfy ourselves with simply, bad things happen and people make mistakes and fail, I think we're not addressing it properly. I think when people fail, the system has failed as well. So we're going to get another serious case review here, aren't we? And you'll get people saying lessons must be learnt. And we've been round this merry-go-round thousands of times. And my sense of this is that we haven't got to grips with fundamentals, and I think the moving away from interventions in early years, the Sure Start centres, which were good and not perfect, because I think there were ways in which we could have done things even better, but lifting children out of poverty, all of those measures really matter. But I know my daughter is a primary school teacher, and she is dealing with cases that concern her with regularity, but the system actually does not work. And I don't want to have another serious case review and people wringing their hands and say lessons learned. We need to have a fundamental review of this and making sure that we treasure the people who are going to come into this service, because it's such a crucial one in social care. They're doing such an important job, and I'm not sure we've got that right in terms of the appeal and the recruitment. The caseloads that people are enduring are often enormous, and we know from 11 years of the cuts that local authorities have had to endure, that has not played well in these circumstances. My own local authority is creaking under the strain of children's services and the challenges that they face. So I don't want another serious case review and say let's put this one right and learn lessons from that, because they never are properly learned unless you look at it fundamentally.
Richard, I'm not going to bring you in on this, because the next question I think is more directed at you, and if you've got something to say on this, give it in your next answer. And the next question is from where's it gone? It was on my screen a moment ago, and now it's gone. There was a text question here about mental health. And, here it is. Julie in Chesterfield. Why does it seem like in amongst all the COVID news, no one is talking about how the pandemic is affecting our mental health? Your specialist subject. Answer starts now.
I think it depends on where you're looking. I mean, I see. On Twitter, that's my main source of news, rightly or wrongly. And I say,
I've never invited you on if I've known that.
It's more instant. It's like instant news.
I know.
And I do see people talking about it, rightly so. Kind of tying it in with the last question, I think funding is a massive issue. We need to attract the right kind of people and keep the right kind of people there. Going back to the last question just briefly with social work, I couldn't do that job, and I'm guessing a lot of people couldn't do that job. So those people need to be, Duncan, you say they're paid, but my question would be, how much are they paid? Are they paid enough? Are they for the job that they do? And then same with counsellors. If you there's been massive backlog. There's queues. There's long waiting times for counsellor at the minute on the NHS. Through the pandemic, we've seen a massive rise in social anxiety, general anxiety. There's part of me that thinks, because I've dealt with people that can't afford gas for their houses, and I've dealt with them, and I've also dealt with people that may have 3 or 4 houses. when I was working for a charity. And I sometimes, there's a part of me that thinks, if you can afford to get private counselling, please, there's people waiting that can't afford. But I know that's pushing a little bit down the privatisation route, which I don't want to go. The NHS, the government needs to fund the counsellors in the NHS, I would say, a bit more.
But have you found, from the counselling that you do yourself, over the pandemic, have the needs of your clients changed?
I think I've noticed changes, yeah. Like I say, a massive rise in social anxiety. Yeah, there was social anxiety before, there was general anxiety before, there was all the problems that we had before, but they've been magnified. We've had the media constantly on about this virus that's going to kill us, this virus that if we go into hospital. I remember sat with my partner when we'd both tested positive and we had to call the ambulance, and we both cried because we assumed because we were calling an ambulance, one of us was going to die. And that's a mental health, that's two adults, and we were sat there, and we because it was constantly dripped into us, and constantly and still is constantly on the news, in the news, on social media. There was no getting away from it. And so, yeah, there's been a massive rise in the anxiety around that, and health anxiety, but also, like I say, social anxiety. We've been inside for so long. Do we want to go outside again?
Duncan?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that the pandemic and the restrictions that have been imposed upon people for 2 years has exacerbated enormously the state of the nation's mental health. And I think virtually all research and writing on that indicates that. What I would say is that what we have seen over the last number of years is a shift enormously, with people now recognising that mental health is on a parity with physical health. And now we need to put our money where our mouth is. So early intervention is absolutely key, and Richard is the expert on this, but I would like to see mental health practitioners trained in our schools. Now, whether that's an individual who's professionally trained or whether that is an existing teacher that has those skills, to be able to help spotting and seeing young people that are developing signs of mental health issues. That has to be an enormous help.
Because at the moment, and actually I go back only 3 or 4 years here, somebody quite close to me was working in a big secondary school and found herself expected to dole out mental health advice to all the kids. And she said, I have no qualification for doing this at all.
That should be trained in.
Exactly.
It should be in the schools. We have now funding for mental health hubs to be in our communities. They should be rolled out. They provide, along with the charitable sector and people like mine, enormous value and support. And also having mental health practitioners sitting within our GP primary care networks throughout all of our areas of the country. All of those three things coupled together, I think, will make an enormous help as society rebuilds.
Claire?
I think we've seen mental health on the decline. You have loneliness, you have isolation. But in fact, one of the best things that I did throughout the pandemic, especially from March last year, was volunteer locally. I'm a district counsellor, and I volunteer to help my community and look after vulnerable people with shopping and prescriptions. And the majority of people I met actually just wanted somebody to talk to. They were scared. They were lonely. I have a 90-year-old who I still go and visit. She's so lovely, lives on her own. And during that time, had absolutely no idea how to get through it. All of her support network were also locked away. So she had nobody. And she missed going to the church. She missed sitting in the day room of her supported living accommodation. So I think those things are just so important and have been completely forgotten when looking at mental health.
Andy?
Yeah, I'd agree with much of what's been said, but I think, save for the parity between physical and mental health, we say that we're on that journey. I think we're miles away, quite frankly. And also, the whole issue of, what's our focus as a society? How do we judge we're successful or doing well? Health and well-being is nowhere near the top of that hierarchy, and I think it's got to be much more significantly so. Lots of people are talking about that now. Lots of countries have actually taken it on as a measure of whether their society is successful or not. Health and well-being being much more prominent.
A final text question. Kate in Hull says, I really enjoyed the Brussels sprout chat yesterday, Iain. Let's all keep things festive. Who would each of your panel play in the Nativity? Well, we've got the three wise men and the Virgin Mary, haven't we?
I was going to go with the Virgin Mary.
That.
Richard.
I was going to go with the Virgin Mary after this strange stomach that I've grown over lockdown.
Andy.
I think I have to be Joseph, because I could just stand there and just not say anything. That would be great.
Unusual for a politician. Duncan?
I did my first park run on Saturday, and there's a picture on my Twitter.
Hang on, you did the marathon, didn't you?
I did do the marathon. Yeah,
Shouldn't it be the other way around?
Yeah, I took from 26 miles down to just doing 3 miles, and I'm standing there in Norfolk with the three wise ladies all dressed up in their capes who ran around. We all dressed up as Santas, and it was a great fun. So I think most of my constituents would say I'll be the donkey at the moment.
I never ever got to be an angel in the school nativity because I was tall. I was always placed as a shepherd and sort of put at the back. So I'd like to be an angel, please, and I'd like lots of sparkly things and a halo and some tinsel, and that'll make me happy.
Match your nails.
I think I would be one of the bright stars in the sky. Duncan Baker, Claire Pearsall, Richard Sefton and Andy McDonald, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, in the next hour, we are going to talk more about the Starr Hobson verdict today, which we covered a few moments ago. We're going to be talking to the local MP about what's happened, what should happen now. And I want to know what your experiences of social services are, because... And I don't want this to be an hour where everybody rings in to say all social workers are useless. That's not the aim of this hour at all. In fact, I want to hear where you've experienced really good practice from your local social services as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 minutes.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister suffered his largest rebellion during a vote on Plan B measures in England. The restrictions passed thanks to Labour's backing, but 99 Conservative MPs voted against COVID passes. Founder and Executive Chair